All right, welcome back to Bootstrap 3 Essential Training. We're still working with understanding the grid system. This is part 3. Let's get right into our development environment and continue our discussion. All right, so the first thing we want to do, let's go ahead and make sure that we've got our Apache web server up and running, because we'll be using that as we walk through the demonstrations. I'm going to go ahead and bring up my brackets text editor, and we've still got that grid_2.html file loaded. And I'm going to bring up the browser that I'm going to use for my demonstrations, and that's basically the same browser that we were using in the past with that grid_2 loaded. What I want to do, the first thing, let's go ahead and save this. Let's save our file as grid_3, because I want you to have the availability of having all these files in the exercise file size as we walk through this, so you can see the different demonstrations. We're not overwriting them. And I'm going to go ahead and pull out our examples from the last demonstration. So I'm just going to have my 3 empty rows on the screen. Hopefully you've printed out that viewport sizes for the Bootstrap grid system. That's part of the PDF from that last exercise. It really has a lot of good information on there, and we're going to be demonstrating some of that information in this group of tutorials. Let me go ahead and go back into my browser. Let's go ahead and load up, save this as grid_3. I'm going to make sure it's there. Let's go ahead and refresh and go ahead and load grid_3. We should have nothing there because we don't have anything yet in the body element of our HTML document. So the first thing I want to do is let's talk about stacking columns on mobiles by making one full width and the other half width. So again, because we're looking at this responsive development environment, the first demonstration, let's go ahead and take a couple of divs. So I'm going to go ahead and copy those so you don't have to watch me type them, and we'll talk about it once we get them in here. So I've set up with our first div with a class of column extra small 12 and then column medium 8, and I'm assigning it color 1 just like we had done in the previous exercises. And on my second div, I'm going to set that up as column extra small 6 and then column medium 4. And again, we've got our standard text in there like we've been doing, just so that you can actually see some content inside these div elements. And this will, what we're trying to demonstrate here is we're trying to demonstrate stack columns on a mobile by making one full width and one half width. So let's go ahead and save those changes. Refresh our browser window, and you can see now that on a full-size device, and if you look back at that chart, we're talking about devices that are medium devices that are greater than 992 pixels. We can see that our settings are for 8 and 4. We actually have an 8 column across the top and then a 4 column across the right side. As we resize this, and now we're getting into that sizing element where we're looking at tablets, which is 768 pixels, you'll notice now they're stacking. And as we go down to the smaller element, they're stacking again. One thing I want to show you that I tend to use a lot, especially in Chrome, it's got some really good development tools. So let me go ahead and demonstrate something that I do as I'm developing my sites. I'm actually going to go into these development tools. Not much interested in this right here for now. We'll probably be using that a little later. But what's cool is I can actually select devices. You'll notice first off, it gives me my screen resolution at the top. Right now I'm at 1255 by 1024. We know based on our chart that if we're over 1200 pixels, that's considered a large device. If I go to 992 pixels, that's considered a desktop. So if I get around that 990 area right in there, we're looking at a desktop. And you'll notice that we saw the break there, because as we get down below that, now we're looking at tablets. And you'll notice now it's changed size. Our layout has changed based on how we've configured it inside of our grid system. And then if we get down to the mobile devices themselves, which are 768 or less, this is what our actual small devices or phone devices would look like. What's cool with the Google Chrome tools is I can actually go here and select individual devices. If I want to see what this looked like on an iPad, I could select the iPad, and then I could select the portrait or the landscape view of that particular iPad. And it's telling me how this layout's going to look in that type of device. I can do the same thing with the phones. I can go to the iPhone 4. This is what that would look like on an iPhone 4 in landscape. This is what it would look like in portrait. These are really cool tools that they make available to us using the Google Chrome web browser. That's why I tend to use Chrome a lot as I'm developing, because it does have a lot of really neat built-in tools. There's a lot of other stuff here, by the way, that we can use also, and we'll talk about some of this stuff as we go through some of our testing in Bootstrap. But again, you can actually pick out the devices, and it actually tells you, like for instance, that Galaxy Note in a portrait display is 360 by 640 pixels. In a landscape, it's 640 by 360, but it's giving you an idea what it's going to look like, what this HTML markup is going to look like inside that type of device. So it's a really good tool, and again, to get there, all I did is I went to my menu bar and I selected More Tools, Developer Tools. And it actually brings those developer tools, or in this case it took them away because we had them loaded. Again, More Tools, Developer Tools. And it brings those back so that you can use them. You can check a lot of different devices, and whether you want to look at it landscape or portrait. There's some other cool things in here that I do too, especially with loading of web pages, but we'll look at that in future lessons. Let's go ahead and turn off those tools for now. I just wanted you to see that that was there. So now you can see how we can actually stack these columns using the extra small and the medium displays. And again, we've given it two different options. We've given an option what we want it to look like on medium and large displays, and what we expect it to look like when we get into the tablets or the smaller displays. All right, so now let's go ahead and look at another demonstration, another exercise, what I would like to do here. I'm going to go into this next row that we have. What I want to do now is let's look at starting our columns at 50% wide on mobile devices and then bumping everything up to 33.3% wide as we get into the larger devices and the desktops. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, paste it in here. You can type this in. In fact, actually, I will give you an opportunity to type this in as we get going. But you'll notice I've got 3 divs. I've got these set up as columns extra small 6 and column medium 4. So what we're basically saying is on the smaller devices, I want you to be 2 across. On the larger devices, I want you to be 3 across. Let's go ahead and bring this up a little bit so you can see that that end of row div goes with this group. Let's go ahead and save those changes. We've assigned these color 2 for our demonstration. Let's go ahead and save those and refresh. And you can see now on the larger devices, we've got our 3 column display, so we're going 4, 8, 12. Remember, we've got equal 12, we've got 12 columns across. And on the smaller devices, it actually goes to 6 columns across, and we actually drop that third one down to the bottom. It actually becomes part of the next line. So it's kind of like overflow in CSS if you're familiar with CSS. But again, another cool way to design your sites based on what type of device you're going to be looking at. If we're on the smaller devices, we're going to have the 2, which are 6 across each. On the larger devices, we're going to have the 4 across each, so 4 columns for each group. And again, we could do the same thing if we looked at the tools. Like we've done in the previous exercise, if I bring the tools up, you can actually see the same thing with the developer tools. On the smaller devices, we've got that 2. If we go into the larger screen size, and I'm just going to go ahead and pull it, you can see that on the larger screen size, when we get to about 1,000 pixels, right about there, we actually get that large display. So we can actually see that we have 3 across in those devices. And as we get into the mobile devices, you can actually see that it shrinks down. Let's go ahead and do one more demonstration, because now what I'd like to do is a demonstration where I've got 50% wide. They're always 50% wide on mobiles and desktops. So we're setting it up where everything appears the same. It's just adjusting the size of the columns themselves. So I'm going to come down into a clear row that I have down here. Let's put these in place. Again, I'm setting up 2 divs. I'm giving them a class, column extra small 6. I've assigned them color 3. So now, let's go ahead and save our changes and refresh that browser window. We should see that we've got a 50% column regardless of the size of the display. Whether I'm on a desktop or I go all the way down to a mobile device, it's going to stay at 2 columns, 50% of the viewport. And that's based on how we've configured it here. We've given it no other options. We've always told it that regardless. Because remember now, when we configure for extra small, unless we set otherwise, that's extra small and up. Because we didn't give it any medium configuration, it's assuming that everything extra small and higher is going to be 6 columns in width. And that's what it's showing us here. Everything extra small or higher, regardless of the size of the viewport, this will always be 50% of the available viewport for those 2 columns. All right, let's look at one more example before we wrap up this portion of the tutorial on grids. And actually, I think I'm going to do one more tutorial on grids because I actually want to show you how we can nest grids, because that's actually an important feature of grids themselves. So what I want to do let's go ahead and make sure we've got an available row, which we don't. So I'm going to go ahead and create another row. Remember, we've always got to have our columns inside a row. So I'm going to create a div with a class of row. I'm going to close that tag out and break down. I'm going to put my comment at the end of the tag, just like I explained to you earlier. I like doing this to keep myself organized, because a lot of times I'll get a whole bunch of divs all piled up on top of one another, closing divs. I want to know which is which. So what I want to do now, let's add one more example to this tutorial where we actually set up a configuration for a mobile, a tablet, and a desktop. So I'm going to go ahead and grab these two divs. Let's go ahead and paste them in so you don't have to watch me type. And I want you to notice here that we've actually set up 3 different settings for these divs. I've got an extra small setting of 12, then I got a small setting of 6, a medium setting of 8. So anything that's medium, viewport, or higher is going to be 8. The small viewport, remember, as we talked about that, that's our tablet, and our extra smalls are mobile devices. So we've actually set up 3 different configurations. And in the small size, extra small is going to be 6. When I go into medium, I'm going to break it down into 4. And again, that's so that we can keep that divisible of 12. Remember, we've got 12 available columns in what we're doing here. So let's go ahead and save these changes to our grid_3. Let's go ahead and refresh our browser. And you'll notice now when we get to the large viewport, we've got one 8 column and one 4 column. When we come into the tablet size, we have a 6 and a 6. And then when we get into the mobile size, you'll notice we've got a 12 and a 6. So the smaller we've gotten, the more that has changed. We start out with an 8 and 4 for the large devices, and that's our medium. Remember, we have 8 here and 4. Then we go into the small devices, we go to 6 and 6, because remember, it's going to be extra small and up. So when we get into the small devices, which is tablets, we go 6 and 6. And then when we get into the extra small, we're going to go 12 and 6. So we're going to have an overflow of 6 onto the next line, because we get into the small devices, and we've given that first column the entire 12 columns that are available. And then we've dropped this setting here, comes to the next line, because obviously there's no space for that in that first set of 12 columns. So I hope that explains how we use the grid. And you're going to have a lot of practice in this as we do other things inside Bootstrap. But I really wanted you to get a good handle on the grid system in Bootstrap. It's a very powerful feature of the Bootstrap system. It's one of the reasons I use it, because it's so much easier to lay out pages. And after our next tutorial, we're actually going to have a little exercise where you're going to lay out a page, and then I'll walk you through how I would lay out the same page using this grid system. So in the next exercise, or the next tutorial, let's talk about nesting grids and how we can nest grids inside of Bootstrap.